Wow. Okay. Yeah, it's the end of March 2023, and Audacity has released a new version, 3.3.0, I guess, right? And there have been a few tiny changes which are interesting, and they cause some confusion, which is fine. But I made about a couple months ago a quick start guide, kind of an unofficial quick start guide on Audacity that included just the things that you would need to start getting some good solid recordings for voice, not really for music or anything in particular, for voice actors. And I thought, since there's some confusion with this, now's a good chance to try to clean these up and take it a little more seriously or something like that. Thanks, Living Dead Man. Wow. For pointing out one of them in the previous video. You know, that's awesome. I probably wouldn't have noticed if it wasn't for that. So, seems like a good idea to make an updated video, basic walkthrough thing or something like that. So let's try it. There are a couple of things that keep tripping people up that I'm going to include in these. The first one is making sure the project rate is correct. The second is setting up the meter range. The next one is new. I'm adding is a clip indicator, making sure that's on. Speaking of levels, the fourth thing would be making sure the levels are good. So I don't know how deep we can go into why, but we can definitely cover that. The fourth and fifth thing are stereo to mono, which is kind of a problem with Audacity, and compressing and normalization, which I guess would be two things. This should be everything you need to get started recording, so let's check it out. Here's Audacity here. It looks really pretty and nice and very similar to the previous rendition. But the first thing you notice it's missing is at the bottom left corner. You can see that the rate indicator is missing. It used to be displayed down here. No big deal, you know, like you could get to this from a menu. Command comma, which is typical for properties and software on Macs, and also Control P, like this, in Windows, will bring up the main preferences control. But the top selection in both Mac and Windows is audio settings. Now you can get to preferences also through a menu at the top, like Audacity and preferences, or in a PC edit preferences. So there it is, but Control P and Command comma might be better suited to your needs, right? The top setting on either of them is audio settings. We can see the 48K here, project sample rate and default sample rate. That's what we're looking for. So the project sample rate is this project right now. So you can change it from whatever the default is. The default sample rate, of course, is the one it sets Audacity at when you boot it up. And if nobody tells you what rate you're going to be using, use 48K. 48K is the standard for drama and a lot of other things. So generally you want, for web audio and everything else, you want 48K unless a producer asks you specifically for something special. And then you can just change the sample rate where it says project sample rate. The reason why this is all important is that you want to change it before you start recording, because this is going to cause you a lot of trouble later. We can convert 48K to 44.1. It's actually better quality than you would think. But it's not perfect, and it has to be done correctly, and there's all this complication with that. So let's not mess that up, right? The meter range. There are two meters at the top of Audacity. I'm sure you've noticed. One of them is for playback, and one of them is to show you what's going on with recording. Right, the microphone one and the speaker one, pretty obvious, right? No big deal. These have a range of something, maybe 72 dB, maybe 100 and something. You can see these right now are set over 100 dB of range. This is ridiculous. You know, you're recording maybe 90 dB. You need about, 100, 110 dB maximum in your space if you're speaking, possibly something like that, depending on the microphone. And then the noise floor in your space is probably 20 dB. Many good recording studios are 20 dB. Many very silent houses are 30. I'll bet it's 40 in here because this isn't a recording environment, right? So think about that. 20, 80, that's only 60, 70 dB, something like that, right? The entire range from silence all the way to as loud as it can go Well, we're not even concerned with that. So if I'm recording here, I'll just press record. And I'm recording here, we can see that the level is maybe a little bit high. I can't tell really, because all we have is this tiny thing between 24 and 12. So we can just, I'll just drag this out till it's giganto, right? Well, look at all this crap, all this wasted garbage here, and you just can't see. When you're recording vocals, you're going to be concentrating on many other things than the level. You don't really want it to be a wasted information into your brain, all this trash in your brain. So you kind of want the meter to be centered around something very important to you. We want the meter to kind of have the middle of the meter where the meat of your action is. And I'll talk about this later in a moment, but it's around minus 18, minus 36 to 18 to 0, kind of in that area. We don't really care about anything below about 40 dB. Under, that can literally be the noise floor, or at least close to it, in a really bad space. If you press, again, Control P or Command Comma, we go right back to this main control thing, and there is a tab on the left called Interface. And now that's not your audio interface. That's literally this interface, these buttons and controls that we see on Audacity. Right here, there's the meter dB range, and this is totally awesome. Most audio editing software doesn't actually have this. This can control or set up the meter and show the how wide the range is, how low the bottom is. For instance, 145 dB below 0. That's ridiculous and useless in most cases, unless you're measuring the noise floor or something like that. It's meaningless if you're a voice actor and you're talking and you've already got your space set up, right? The lowest width setting at the very top is the cool one. Minus 36 dB, shallow range for high amplitude editing. This is awesome. So set it to that. You can set it back later. No big deal, right? And now the meters have too much detail. Look at that. They have the minus 18 line right in the middle. Isn't that crazy? Like, you can press record. And now you can look at the meter and see exactly what's going on. All right, now the clip indicator. This is kind of awesome. Most audio software has some kind of light bulb, something to show you that you've messed up. When the signal gets too hot and it overloads the electronics or it overloads the numbers that are available with the digital audio software, it's not intended for you to use anything louder than a certain level. That range doesn't go on forever, and it shouldn't. So that you select some kind of indicator to show that you have crossed that line and you're now doing something very bad. We need one of these for Audacity, just like any software, not because you can't see if something's overloaded, but so that you can see if something's overloaded without looking for it. You're concentrating on something else. For instance, if you're in the middle of a take, and it's this long thing, and you don't know if you overloaded the sound and ruined the take, but it's very early, and you're going to go on, and you're in the middle of it, and you're going to go on and on and on, and this is this big thing. Are you going to stop it and ruin the flow, right? Well, there's a cool tool for this. If you hit View, right? See it? And then you go down to the very bottom selection, Show Clipping. It's that simple. Turn that on. If you look at it again, you'll see that there's a check mark by it. You see it? Now when you overload the audio, it's going to turn red. So we absolutely know that we've messed up. I'm going to turn this up and do this. I'll turn it back down later so it doesn't really make you mad, right? So, oh my gosh, look at that. That's crazy. Now, if you look at this clip, it's pretty obvious we can see these red areas, right? These zones where the signal has been blasted into oblivion. And if we look really closely, it's very obvious. See it? These square tops and bottoms. It's very, very clearly telling us what's going on. And obviously the signal waveform would have gone up here and would have gone down here, but it's just blown out of the scene. Okay, clip indicator. Awesome, isn't it? Now that we've clipped the snot out of the signal, we should actually figure out what normal is for recording. A lot of us are old and ancient people, and we remember the analog world, which can inform us a lot about the motive behind a lot of this stuff. In the ancient times, the meter had a 0 dB that wasn't at the top. it was actually in the middle. Numbers could go up and down. Sounds weird, right? So that 0 on meters, like a VU meter, which is a very specialized meter, it's kind of weird like we are, that 0 point in the middle was normal. So you call that 100% modulation. And the idea behind this was if you had two recordings, like two people's voices, and you tried to get that needle aimed at 100% on both of them, they would end up sounding the same loudness to us. On average, in the midband anyway, there's about 18 dB extra above 0, right? So it's going around 0. There's about, you need that obviously for loud shouting and for stuff that's a little bit above 0 in the analog world, right? Today we have these stupid digital meters, which are dBFS, and that means full scale. So the 0 is now in the wrong place. It's as high as it can go. It's as if the people that made this stuff didn't care about us and they just cared about the software or whatever. They put the 0 where the computer guys want it. Anyway, the 0 is up at the very top where clipping is, where the problem is. And you just have to know that minus 18 is 18 dB away from 0. There was an older standard that had 24 dB below 0, meaning 100% modulation-ish. This really gets messed up. But in the end, we have 18 dB of headroom, and that's usually enough. That's why all these consoles that go all the way back into the 1950s have about, in electronics, all this hardware, it all has about 18 dB of headroom. Because they know that if the normal level is 0 or whatever that is, then your screaming will be 12 dB, maybe peaks of 15 dB, right? So that's what the difference. So if we get rid of some of this junk from earlier and we start recording, we can see the level on the meter, and we can also see it in this waveform nonsense, right? And you'll notice on Audacity, it is a linear reading. So it has 1.0, which means full blast. 0.5 means minus 6 dB. Don't worry about it. 0.25, if it was here, would be minus 12 dB. So you can kind of get an idea where minus 18 dB would be. And we're averaging minus 18 right now. That means that the meter shows a little bit under it sometimes and a little bit above. I should adjust it and make sure it's right. So you can watch, you see what I'm talking about. Minus 18, just keep your eye on it. And you're basically trying to target it like old airplane instruments, like VOR instrument. You would just, if it goes over to the right too much, you would turn it down, right? And to the left, turn it up until there's a point when you think, it's about right. And you just let go of the knob and that's it. Now we're averaging minus 18. And this is kind of a nice spot because if you get really loud, hey guys, you see it doesn't clip. That's just kind of average for humans. You kind of want to start looking at turning it down if you're above -3 ever. Notice there's a little marker here that's very close to -3.
Wow.
Audacity has this weird behavior. So most audio software records to one or multiple channels, and then you can adjust them and make more channels. And that's not really unusual with Audacity, except that you only get 2 channels input recording, and they're treated as if they were stereo. But the problem is you have to split these, and you would be tempted to somehow make a mono recording since you're only using one microphone sometimes, right? No big deal. But we would go to this audio setup tab. It's conveniently here for us. And you'll notice that there is a recording channels control, and you can select mono. This is a problem. So it seems like everything's cool, but what it would be doing is taking your mono channel and then putting it into a 1-channel recording. We could do that, right? Everything's fine, isn't it? But you'll notice something really strange. Half the time when you're using the mono channel, they've somehow added some kind of assumed processing to lower the level, 6 dB. And the explanation for this doesn't make a ton of sense to me. But it was that if you had 2 channels and they were merged into one somehow, they would be too loud, and then there was an extra 6 dB headroom added for the combination. And that does technically make sense, except that it shows up now anyway on the 1 channel. And I can show you this by turning it up and clipping again. I'll turn it down later so it doesn't bother you. So here we are, recording, and I'm going to shout for a second. Whoa, what's up? We can see an issue here because the clip indicator hasn't gone off, has it? There's this very square topped area right here, isn't it? It's kind of obvious. So if we zoom in, as you would, you start noticing something horrible going on. Obviously, the signal is clipped, right? So it's ruined. So the entire metering system is off by 6 dB. Now your clip indicator doesn't work. Now you can't record at minus 18 dB because you don't know what it is. I think it's, maybe it's minus 24 dB now. It's totally screwed up. So the way around this that everyone kind of deals with it, and I should remind you that on some USB microphones it does work fine, at least it's super confusing. But a way around it is to always record in stereo and never have any of these problems. Everything works out correctly. You can record, the clip indicator works, right? Everything works fine. Cool, but now you've got the left channel. But that's not a big deal either, because we just have to chop this in half and throw the other channel in the trash. The track always has this control area. Each track has one with its name and some other stuff right here. Just, I'll do this a couple times so you can remember this. Right click on that open zone right here in the control area, just like this, and hit split stereo to mono. There it is, right? Do it again. Right click, split stereo to mono. I'm doing this twice because it's important you remember this. Just try it a couple times, no big deal. You can press Control Z and try it again. Now you can just X out this other thing, throw it in the trash, and now you have a nice centered track. Record, the clip indicator works. See, plays fine. Okay, let's move on to compression and normalization, which are two things. So we'll do compression now and we'll move on to normalization later. We're ready to go. We've got our thing going and we press record and we're talking and we're like, oh, wow, that's great. And at one moment, let me get this lined up right. Okay, so everything's fine. And at one moment, something gets extra loud. Yeah. And it's much louder than the rest of the content. So if I select this and get rid of it, we can just look at this one piece. Loud. Yeah. And it's much, that's way too loud, but this is a good example. This section here, and in one moment, something gets extra loud, has a totally normal dynamic range. It's everything seems normal. So you think I could send that out. Your brain handles loud and quiet sounds a lot better than a recording does. Right? So if you sent this out, it would be like this really, it would be kind of a problem because it's not the way you hear it or imagine it. We need to take the loudest sounds only and have them turned down by some kind of magical volume knob a little bit. Not all the way down to everything else, but so that they're still bigger, but they're bigger at a different ratio. Right? A different rate. So the really big things will be kind of big. The kind of big sounds will be just slightly, you see what I'm going on? You're like, right? And that's what we're going to do. So you have to select with Audacity, you have to select what you're going to process. And generally you just press Control A, Command A in the Mac, and that will select your entire piece of content. And then you have to apply a filter. Recently, a couple of versions ago, Audacity added these live effects, but as you can see in this system, which is loaded down, there's none available and you have to add them, and it's just kind of, there are some problems there. But we can apply them the old way, which is fine. You would just select the area, then you would hit, let me get rid of this too. Right? You saw that, right? Effect. And then you would select some kind of effect, right? Which would be compression or anything, I don't know. Now, the ones you want may not be on here, but they're probably in your system. You would just turn on the plugin manager. So Effect Plugin Manager. Everything in the system is here, and most of these might be disabled. A cool thing about this is if you have only a few things you always use, you can go through here, select everything, disable everything, and then pick the types of things that you actually use and enable them, right? Then when you hit Effect, you don't have 300 things, you just have the things you happen to like. If you really want to search for something else, you know, you see what's going on here. So this is just a half page, right? Very nice. Nice, right? Okay. Now we have some compressors in here. Let's see if we can find something usable. Compressor. This is the generic one that comes with Audacity. There's nothing wrong with it. It works quite well. And it has a few controls on it, which will inform how it's used. Now remember, we have all this stuff here. on either side of this moment, that's all kind of the same-ish. And then, kind of around minus 18, and then we have this moment out of control that we want to make slightly less out of control without affecting the rest of it. So here's how the compressor actually works. It has a few controls. If you can imagine a robot, like cartoon, like old movies, and the robot, you tell the robot to go to the volume knob and be ready. So there's a fader for this channel or something like that, if you can imagine. And then you say, okay, robot, there is a point when I want you to take action. Whenever it's louder than this one level that I select for you, then take action above that, do something, but below that, just don't do anything. Ignore it. That line is the threshold, and there's a control for it right here. See it? Not nice. So if the threshold was set super high, the compressor would never do anything. Like it would just be as if it wasn't there. If you set the compressor threshold too low, it would be smashing the sound, doing something all the time, and then that might not be what you're looking for. So since we're averaging around minus 18 all the time, a generic good place to tell it when to start taking action is right around the same place, 16, 18 dB, something like that. Right? That means when you're regularly talking, it's not really doing anything. But as soon as you shout, it takes action. It turns the volume down, right? The other control that matters, and there's only two really, is the ratio. And the ratio is what to do when you've told it to take action. So it's above minus 18. What do I do? Well, it turns the volume down. So the ratio is how much it makes something less louder. It doesn't make it quieter unless it's some crazy ratio, but it makes it less louder. Does that make sense? So you have this, it gets louder at a certain rate. It will change that rate by just turning down the volume. It's just a really fast robot that you've told to do this. So at 1 to 1, that means if one unit comes in, then one unit goes out. In other words, don't do anything. If we go to 2 to 1, the ratio's changed. That means if you get above minus 18 in this case, like we set, then say you went up to minus 14. We've gone up 4 dB. Well, 2 to 1. Turn it down until it's 2 dB. Does that make sense? If it went up 10 dB over the threshold, you would make it 5 dB. I hope that makes sense. So it halves the amount over the threshold, and it keeps turning down the volume. The louder stuff gets, it keeps turning it down more to follow your directions. The threshold, when, and the ratio, how severe, right? And that's it. So normal with a compressor, the generic normal, is about 3 to 1. So 9 dB comes in over the threshold, then it becomes 3. That sounds like a lot, but it's kind of the way we hear. So you'll see over time that that's actually a pretty good setting. 1.5 to 1 is considered very mild. Kind of doesn't do much really, right? And 10 to 1 on the other end is excessive. It's so severe. You're basically telling the robot, okay, above this level, try not to let anything more in. Remember, we've only got 18 dB of headroom. That means that at 10 to 1, you're not even going to make 2 dB over the threshold. The other controls that are not as important are attack and release. They are important, but they're usually set to a usable kind of generic setting like this. 0.14 seconds. That's not really right, but lots of compressors behave weirdly and don't really act like they're the stated speed. What you really want is a little faster than 30 milliseconds attack with vocals. And who knows what number that is. So you just have to turn the dial until it sounds good. In this case, where it's just generic setting is 0.14 and 1, you just change it if you feel like it's acting funny or just the beginnings of things are popping through or something's wrong, right? Now, when I apply this, we're going to notice that the low parts here, if you can see them, are not changing much. But you will see this loud part come down to be more like the low parts. So we're going to set this at 10 to 1 to exaggerate this. And I'll hit apply. All right. You see, the loud part It will sound louder because of the inflections of the voice and stuff like that, but it's been smashed down to be almost the same size. So let's play it and see what it's like. Something gets extra loud. Yeah, and it's much... All right, you hear that? They sound kind of the same. Something gets extra loud. Yeah. But you can still tell which one's the shouting because of the way it sounds. Now, this is a little severe, right? So remember that 3-to-1 thing. So if we press Control-Z and undo, and we hit Effect Compressor, right? We can bring this ratio down to something a little bit more reasonable. Probably 2.5, 3-to-1. Severe would be 4-to-1, you know, kind of for vocals, right? Hit Apply. See, it's very, very strong. Look, now the shouting is barely any louder, even at 3-to-1. Loud. Yeah, and it's much cool. Compression. So, all right. Finally, normalization. This has caused a lot of confusion. Some time ago, quite some time ago now, Audacity added a second normalizer, which is a lot more useful for people today. We've got this piece of audio and the producer has requested you send something that is normalized to some weird number like -23 dB LUFS. A little bit much to get into what LUFS is, but Audacity used to have a normalizer that would take all your audio and it would make it all the same in some way. But unfortunately, it is a peak normalizer. This is a kind of an interesting problem, and people have mistaken this for what we consider a normalizer. I'll show you what I mean. A peak normalizer is for systems where going above a certain level will be very, very bad, like a radio station. You don't want anything going into that big tube to be above a certain level or you've got an issue. So they will create something that can absolutely not let anything in above some kind of level. So a peak normalizer would just listen to the whole audio file, find the loudest thing in it anywhere, and make that, turn that down until, you know, turn the level down on everything. No, not a compressor, just like turns the whole thing down until the peak is whatever is their limit. So I can do that here. Select all, effect, normalize, right? If you don't see it again, you can turn it on in the plugin manager. You can find it and turn it on, right? Effect, normalize, right? And the interface for the normalize looks like this. Nice, convenient thing. And then it says normalize peak amplitude to, in this case, -3.0. Very common. dB. Now, if you hit this, it took this loudest point, this guy. See it? Let's just kind of get in here and, right? It took this, whatever that is, and put that at -3. In fact, you could play this and it'll probably show -3 on the meter. See? Sure enough. Well, that's meaningless to us. If you had a recording that was super smooth and everything was the same level, it would make the whole damn thing -3. And if you had one person that shouted once, it would make that -3. And it's not useful to us whatsoever, right? In our application. So what we need is something that will normalize the signal using that LUFS weird loudness thing. Now what that does is it takes the whole file and it averages it somehow. And it takes the average loudness, which in our case, we were hoping was -18 most of the time. And it takes that level and makes that some level. That's why it's so low, right? Select everybody, right? Important. Effect, loudness, normalization. Just as before, you can access it in the plugin manager. Notice it's quite different, right? We have two settings here, root mean squared and perceived loudness. Root mean squared is another way of measuring, right? The same thing. Perceived loudness is that weird LUFS. So if somebody says, we would like you to give us something -23 LUFS, then this is what they want. That way, when your track comes in with everyone else's, they can get to work because your level isn't some stupid, you know, it sounds like everybody else in the room and everything works well. Cool, right? Here it is. Press apply, and there it is. Now this track is -23 LUFS. All right. All right, that's it. This is everything you need to get some good recordings going. There are some other more advanced tools in Audacity, of course, like anything else. But most of those are not life or death tools. They're more like things that make things more efficient or faster or things like that. Totally different. So we don't really need them just to get going. Let me know if anything about this is freaking you out or confusing and stuff like that. And I hope you make some awesome recordings.